report from the CAO regarding police services options review, the Ontario Provincial Police and Shelburne Police Services. Denyse, the floor is yours.
Through your worship, so I'm going to start off the report, and then at a point in the overview we'll go into the debentures and the long-term capital-related costs associated with those projects. The Treasurer is going to speak to that, and we're going to add just a graphic for you because we feel that that's quite understandable. So, as the Mayor has already indicated, that it's the intent of Council tonight to receive the report. So I will note that the recommendation that we had provided to you was exactly that, as well as asking you as Council to determine which of the two options you would like to proceed with, and they're quite simplistic. One is that you advise the Ontario Provincial Police by the 15th of July that you accept their presentation for contract policing for the town of Shelburne as presented on the 14th of July. January 14, 2019, and alternatively, the other option was that you don't accept that same contract policing proposal as presented. So in terms of the background, it was important for us to provide for the community as well the context under which this project was initiated. So the understanding was that it was the significant costs associated with the facility that were the primary and only reason for evaluating the options and considering the Ontario Provincial Police with respect to a substitute or an alternative to the Shelburne Police. It's long been acknowledged that there were deficiencies in the current facility that have been addressed by numerous initiatives, which were most recently addressed last week, and was also recognized through this process that the quality of services and the commitment of the Shelburne Police Services established in 1879 were never in question. It's also recognized that many communities have undertaken such an initiative and analysis, and that analysis is never easy. It can be a difficult process for any community, for the town, for the local police force, whether that local police force is a local police force or even the OPP or another contracted service, and it's not an easy initiative. At the same time as Shelburne requested a review, there were other communities in Ontario, many of them which are listed, and I'll refer to that later, that were undergoing the same type of analysis. And many, if not all, were looking at cost savings as the fundamental reason they were initiating that process. It was on December 4th, 2017 that this council, former council, but this council of the town of Shelburne, requested the OPP provide a costing for the provision of police services for the town of Shelburne. The OPP presented as the chronology has listed, but I'm not going to go through that they were originally scheduled to be here in July of 2018. In recognition by council that there was a municipal election in October, that date was postponed to January of 2019, and they were here on the 14th of January. With respect to the budgets for both policing organizations, the Shelburne Police gross operating budget, as identified in the 2019 budget, is about $2.6 million. They have corresponding revenues of $124,000, so a net budget of $2.496. Additionally, not in their net budget is a separate capital budget of approximately $93,000, and those budgets were provided to council and on our website in Appendix 1. It's important to note, and this was incorporated into the financial analysis that the consultant undertook, that historically and on an ongoing basis, all of the administrative costs associated with payroll, benefits administration for police, as well as our accounts payable, accounts receivable, the building facility costs associated with that component of the building are borne and included in the town of Shelburne's operating administration budget. We provided an estimate of those costs based on the 2019 budget, and they're approximately $84,000. So to get the true net budget, you would need to add all of those accounts together. In contrast, the presentation from the OPP provided the town of Shelburne with a transitional contract based on 1 year's costs, and those in 2019 were about $2.68 million, and there were startup costs identified for utilization of the space at the Primrose Dufferin detachment of about $414,000, so that their combined cost was about $3.1 million. As has been outlined in the process overview that the police or the OPP provided, there's two components to the way that contract is formulated. There is a 3-year transition contract where it's based on the majority, if not all, staff applying for positions with the OPP, and that complement continuing over 3 years. It is starting in year 4, and this is the provincial approach, where a contract would then be based on 2 components. It would be based on the base operating costs, and I'm referencing the word base because we have heard many people referring to that as basic, so we needed to clarify that, combined with a cost based on calls for service. You'll see in this report on a number of occasions that we keep repeating ourselves, and it's not by accident, that based on the town's 2019 budget, 1% adjustment, and that's either upward or downward, is approximately $69,550. On March 25th, Jennifer, can you switch it to the third page, if you don't mind? Thank you so much. The billing model was also presented to council. Without reiterating that, that just provided an overview of how they would bill in year 4, which is consistent with other communities. We had questions that the consultant hadn't incorporated in that analysis of how many communities have reviewed looking at their options. So we've given you a list of all the communities from 2001 to most recently West Nipissing in 2019 that have selected to disband their local police force and go with the OPP. There was a moratorium on the process of consideration for a number of years while the billing model was reconstituted, so that's why there's no review. Additionally, there are a number of municipalities that have looked at the OPP in terms of process and either canceled that process while it was underway, remained with their local police force, or alternatively contracted with another force. The consultant had also referenced one other case where in the town of St. Mary's, they were OPP and they chose to contract, and we understand because they saved approximately $100,000 with the Stratford Police. Unique to this list is Orangeville, which is on the next page after Owen Sound, is while they declined the proposal of looking at the OPP in December of 2017, most recently they're initiating that process again, and they received their costing proposal on June the 10th of this year. So as background, and a lot of this was addressed in the report last week, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but there has been analysis on the deficiencies that have been identified with the current space occupied by the police, which is about 5,000 square feet in this building. There were a number of options that were looked at, including renovation, acquiring a new building, and constructing a new facility. And then again, there was a sort of a peer review approach to that where there were changes to the approach, and then there were 4 options looked at, and as was asked by Councillor Keegan tonight, in that scenario, when that second review looking at up to 10,000 square feet was undertaken, they were based on 2015 construction costs and the location of a new building. It's understood that that would be a 1-story facility at approximately 10,000 square feet, had never been confirmed. The chronology on the next page has been well promoted and outlined. The question tonight, the statement by the mayor tonight qualified that while the response to the OPP must be provided by the 15th of July, council will be looking at an alternative meeting other than this one to render their decision. Through the process and what other communities have looked at, third-party review that is independent was initiated and undertaken by the town of Shelburne. That resulted in the consultant's report, and that was the firm Pomax on June the 3rd, 2019. And they were hired through an RFP, and the consultant's report was provided fully in Appendix 5 with the one change that we recognized during the question and answer period that council had, that we had to adjust the estimated severance related to the uniform contract. And I'll be addressing that further in the report. So the list of all of the initiatives or facets that the consultant examined were listed. I do want to reference the fact that 7 scenarios were calculated because staff is providing another scenario in this report that we'll walk through, but that is using the data and the analysis that was completed by the consultant considering future cost per household based on the data that he had collected. What also is important is that we did look in this report as well, similar to what the consultant looked at, is amortization schedules based on a range of capital facilities, and that included what the loans on the debentures would be, whether it was $3 million or $7 million, whether that was 15 years or 20 years as well. So the consultant had estimated based on the 7 scenarios that he had reviewed, and one of those, of course, was just looking at operating or facility amenities, which were less than minimal at $150,000. He had also reflected that the original estimate, and I just said, has been increased for severance. So the total severance costs associated with the Shelburne Police Services, which is comprised of 3 succinct and separate agreements, one specifically for the chief, one for the uniformed officers, and 2 civilian staff, totals $2.3 million, actually $2.36 million. This estimated upward cost was based on our review of the severance based on its contracts, and was also a calculation that we understood that anyone who was hired by the OPP would be provided with severance. As already stated, 7 analysis and scenarios were conducted, and the 10-year cumulative savings based on those scenarios range from approximately $3.9 million to $2.4 million. And some scenarios did include, as I mentioned, the renovation costs, whether they were $150,000 or $3 million or $6 or $7 million. However, in every scenario, as the consultant had summarized, there were significant savings, and again, this was highly a financial exercise, that in choosing to contract with the Ontario Provincial Police, there would be savings as well as the avoidance of any significant estimated facility costs associated with addressing the deficiencies that are currently before us. So I will read this because it's an important summary, and I think it's the only place in the report that staff have replicated what the consultant said to carry it forward, so you don't have to go back to the report. So the consultant's report had summarized, and he presented these summaries at the beginning of his report, that the evidence of police services by the Ontario Provincial Police is a reasonable option for the town. Evidence also indicates that the same quality and level of service currently experienced by the town of Shelburne will continue if the town decides to contract with the OPP, but at a much lower cost. And he had recommended the town of Shelburne consider the OPP as their policing services provider. With that said, Council had also asked us most recently to look at a costing option with respect to a police renovation of the existing building not exceeding $3 million. So we presented that report at the last council meeting. We also had to indicate that our assumption as staff was that was $3 million in terms of debenture and borrowing only, and that we would apply in addition to that any applicable DCs, current and future, against a future capital expansion. So that brought us up to about $3.9 million, and we were going to get approximately 8,900 square feet in that renovation. Sorry, 8,700 square feet. And then we were using a concept plan. These were not architectural or engineering drawings for space. They were conceptual plans based on addressing the deficiencies, including making sure that it fit within that budget. So council had asked us to send forward your direction to the Police Services Board, which was done. And I'm going to read the response from the Police Services Board so that that's there, because this was recently provided on the 19th of January. On the matter of the CAO's accommodation report and the request for comment, the Shelburne Police Services Board agreed that the proposed renovation drawings, as provided, met with an earlier identified the Walter Fetty Strategic Plan 2015, conducted October 2015. There's a typo there, I apologize. Space needs and functional program analysis requirements being between 8,000 and 9,000 square feet. As suggested as necessary in the meeting, current and future adequate accommodation requirements. However, the board does not possess sufficient building knowledge nor the expertise to comment on whether the proposed design, being spread over 3 floors, either meets with I, specific code requirements, and in brackets, example, size of holding cells proposed, or II, the efficient and necessary functional needs of a working police station. To that end, the chief has expressed considerable concerns with the proposed plans. As part of the process, I'll move on to the community engagement. So Jennifer, if you could flip it to page 9, please. It's quite a few pages ahead. We did complete, and this was independent of the consultant's work, the Have Your Say Shelburne Police Survey. And it was open from March 28th until June the 5th, 2019. And the survey results in full, as well as all comments received. The only time a comment was modified is if there was profanity or type of language was not appropriate, and we didn't have to actually sanitize anything. So other than one small change that we made with respect to a self-identifier, everything is actually verbatim as provided on that online survey. So the survey was completed by 520 people, 477 of those people actually lived in Shelburne, because we didn't stop you from going forward if you didn't live in Shelburne, and 43 did not. The survey asked people's opinion on 11 categories of policing services, which were quite generic but also important, engaging. What's of value to residents of the town of Shelburne? So those 11 questions and their responses, while they're also in the appendix, are listed here, and I'm sure council has gone through that. Without going through them all, there were certainly some absolutely essentials that our community has expressed are very, very important to them. They're also expressing significant importance on speeding enforcement, which I think was characterized in the last report, and what they deem to be very important to them in terms of what they value in terms of community policing. And there were two questions that were asked that tie back to the capital-related costs, which a lot of this initiative was founded on. We have repeatedly as staff emphasized the debenture load that this community currently faces. So the two questions were to gauge the input of the community and their willingness to pay for whether a renovated police station or a new police station. And the two prices that were put forward to them were ranges of $4 to $7 million and $2 to $3 million for a renovation. So before council is the information on what I as a resident would pay in a number of categories, from I'll pay anything to I'll pay nothing. So those are summarized based on the percentages. And when we get to the summary of what those debenture loads would be based on the average assessment, as well as a number of scenarios, you can see whether or not those are correlating or not between what somebody who said they would pay anything and what the price potentially may be for them to be considering. So as well as the online survey, council was submitted a petition, a community petition on the 10th of June. And the petition was called Keep Our Shelburne Police. It was noted tonight that in addition to the signatures that were received that night, and those were 1,059, there's an additional 100 submitted tonight. I will note that we did quickly go through that as staff, and of the 1,059, 696 resided in the town of Shelburne, 309 did not, and we had 54 that neither had a signature that we could recognize or an address. And we counted really quickly that there were 6 duplicate signatures. What we didn't summarize is how many of these signatures were from the same address. So there were a number of signatures, obviously, from the same address, sometimes more than 2, sometimes 4, because it's obviously a family at that address. So this is going to move us on to the financial impact section, and I'm sorry if this is going to be really long and a line-by-line analysis, but we feel it's very important to walk council through this component of it. So while we were asked to look at a renovation project of up to $3 million plus DCs, we did that. We also provided in that report to you a summary of what the debt load would be on such a scenario. This report is going to dive more into the debt load and hopefully provide the context under which any future capital costs, regardless of the price, fit into the obligations that we currently have and the financial strain that we are facing. So our current debt load, as was outlined in the 2019 budget scenario, as well as the debt report that the Treasurer overviewed, is currently about $5.2 million. So we have a number of projects that are online, as we'll say, that don't retire at a minimum from 7 years. And they're actually, some of them are another 17 years. So that entire report that the Treasurer provided is listed for you in Appendix 7. So on page 13 of this report, we've summarized, and again, this is an extract from the report, and I apologize for those that it's difficult to read it online, you can see it in the report, is that what the load is on those current 5.2 million and how the annual borrowing limit is tied to the amount of projects and the debt you have. So it's, I guess in layman's terms, we don't achieve capacity on what we're able to borrow in terms of our maximum until some of these projects fall off. And the most recent projects that will fall off of the debt capacity and the obligations that we have are 7 years from now. So as we've summarized most recently and under this chart, is that we have a number of projects, and predominantly in water and wastewater granted, that affect not the tax supported operating budget, but the water and sewer, I'll call it sewer instead of wastewater, to make it a more understandable project. However, it doesn't matter for the annual repayment limit where that debt is incurred. So currently, on our schedule of projects for 2020 to 2023 and at the upper 2024 is about $20.4 million of project. Connecting Link, as people are aware, we've applied for another grant most recently. We've acknowledged in this report if we did not receive funding this year for just over $1 million, we would not proceed with this project. We would not issue debt for Connecting Link, which is a provincial authority in many ways, because not only can we not afford it, we would just continue to patch it. So we've gone through the scenarios, and we most recently asked council to approve a debt policy, which you did, and we went a very strategic approach and very conservative on what we could afford based on our own source revenue, and what many other communities have adopted is a 40% of the provincial allowance of what we're going to borrow. We're going to walk through, or Carey's going to walk through, how that already, with this list of projects just under this chart, is going to require us to probably go to a 45% ARL and borrow more. Because we've estimated that within this 20 million, we'll need to borrow, and this is factoring in all the grants and everything else that we would be eligible for, to be about 12 million. So I'm going to turn it over to Carey right now to walk through the nitty-gritty numbers, and then I'll come back after that with some more background on costing.
Again, we apologize if this seems repetitious to some of the other reports that we've already provided you with respect to debt. But as Denyse says, the 40% limit that we set only 2 weeks ago will not cover what we will be facing in the very near future as far as capital projects go. It is important to note the ARL figure changes annually, and it's a 2-year-old figure. So the annual repayment limit that is actually listed on the ministry's site for the year-end 2018 doesn't take effect until January 2020. So the numbers that I've used, Jennifer, do you have this chart? The numbers that I've used in the chart tonight reflect what will be our annual repayment limit in 2020. When you are factoring in the debt servicing into a gross remaining total debt amount, there's many variables to consider, such as market conditions, the length of the loan, the term of the loan, and the loan value. So you have to work backwards to come up with what your annual debt capacity could potentially be. And as Denyse already indicated, the anticipated borrowing needs will be in excess of $20 million for projects. If we factor in some of the grants that we may be eligible for at the time, as well as transferring from the reserves that we have established, we may find ourselves in the $12 to $15 million borrowing range. As well as future DCs. So if you look at the chart, the graph on the right shows what our current 40% of our ARL is. We have the ability to borrow an additional $8.5 million based on a 20-year loan at 3%. That would mean an additional debt payment of $571,603, which is approximately 8% increase in the tax rate. Moving forward, if you look at a 50% level of the ARL, same thing, we would be able to borrow up to $12,058,000, which is 12% increase in the tax rate. And hopefully a worst case scenario would be 55% of the ARL, which would allow us additional borrowing room of $15,030,000, but would mean additional debt payments of $1,418, which equates to 14% of a tax rate. So keeping in mind when you passed the budget back in March, the struggles that you faced coming up with a 2.9% increase in the budget. So these scenarios would well exceed any budget considerations that you have already faced with your first budget as a new council. In addition, staff have already engaged a consultant to review the water and sewer rates. Our study was done in 2017, and some of the projects that our engineers have identified were not included in that study. So our water and rate study will hopefully help us to capture some of the missing revenue that we're going to need. Having said that, if our water rates stayed exactly as they are today, with the 2 new subdivisions that are coming on board, we would be collecting at total build-out approximately $500,000 additional revenue a year. But if you look at the additional debt payment for the lowest loan of another $8.5 million, there's your $571,000 right there gone. So as discussed, additional debt can be funded through tax increases, or in our case, because the majority of these projects are water and sewer related, they would have to be funded through water and sewer rates because they are user pay budgets. In addition to development charges being used to pay for these water and sewer capital needs, we would need the water rate study to help us get to the goal of only needing to borrow between 12 and 15 million. So the debt load limit, whether it be increased or not, is not sufficient to include the facility capital needs or the debt needed for a policing facility. The facility needs of police services was recently reviewed, and based on what space could be provided for a cost of up to $3 million plus applicable development charges, all of which have not been collected yet. And as stated previously at the last debt report and at the time of budget deliberations, Council has to keep in mind that our annual repayment limit is not ours alone. It also is shared with the joint boards of the fire, arena, and library, as well as the BIA. So maximizing your debt capacity would prevent you from having access to emergency money should something arise in the way of an emergency for the town or for any of the boards and committees. And I'll turn it back to Denise.
So with the summary that the Treasurer has just provided in terms of the ARL and what the impacts of borrowing are, and that the current projections of those particular projects totaling $20.4 million have not included the projected costs associated with any police facility, regardless of it's $3 million, $5 million, $8 million, whatever it may be. That said, we had provided in the last report what the loan impacts were for the $3 million, and we've also now added the $7 million, just so council can see that and tie it back to what Carey just overviewed. And our debt policy doesn't allow us to borrow money past 20 years. We wouldn't ever want to change that, even if we did adjust the ARL from a 45 or 40% to whatever you thought we could be burdened with as a community. But we've outlined that, and the rates for infrastructure in Ontario are variable with respect that they may change. We had also provided, and I know this one is difficult to read as it was last time, we went through a number of scenarios to make sure that what that meant, ARL aside and debt capacity aside, because a police facility would be a tax-supported operating budget, unlike water and wastewater projects, which are on those fees. So we wanted to go through again, very quickly, what those impacts were to the average assessment. And this is where, for council, if you correlate this information and the input from the Community Engagement Service on the range of answers from the community, I would pay anything till I'll pay nothing. You may then be able to, I think, provide some connection between those responses. So just to reiterate, if we were to borrow $3 million, as we said last time, for the average residential property based on a 15-year loan, that's $80. And if it was based on a 20-year loan, it's $64. If you switch that to a $7 million loan, that impact of that same property, and again, this is 2019 dollars, would be 186, 64, and likewise, if it was 20 years and over a longer period, it would be 151. So on that chart, there's a number of homes and businesses, but I think it's critically important that we also refer to business, because a lot of businesses pay significant taxes within the community, so that you're aware of the impacts to them based on those scenarios as well. So for a medium industrial, on the $3 million loan, their taxes based on a 15-year debenture would be about $787. And if it was 15, obviously it's expedited, it would be $638. Where it changes drastically, and if you look at large industrial, we had estimated that the increase cost to that particular employer or that producer would be about $13,000 a year, or alternatively, if it was 20 years, would be $10,500. However, if we take that same amount and use a $7 million project, the cost to that particular employer would be about $30,000 a year more, or alternatively $25,000 a year more in taxes for respectively 15 or 20 and 15 years. So what we also emphasized again is that these estimated tax increases, which would almost be a special purpose levy, which is the approach that some municipalities have taken on major capital projects, are exclusive of other impacts in capital projects that are tax supported, operating budget related. So for example, if you wanted to do other projects in recreation, or if there were other operating cost increases, whether it's a CPI, which is I think quite reasonable, of 2%, those are in addition to that particular capital project for 15 or 20 years. So now going back to the more operational costs and paying for the costs associated with one-time and transition costs, we've now done that because that's part of the analysis that staff also undertook in addition to what the consultant looked at. So the consultant's analysis had incorporated the one-time costs as almost being debenture, and that was the $414,000 that we must pay to the OPP to then have occupancy of the Primrose Dufferin detachment. As a community, we collect development charges. We had factored in that in looking at the $3 million initiative and applying all DCs that we currently have as well as future DCs. So we currently have about $437,000 in DCs collected, and the one-time costs are about $414,000. So that would be almost a literal transferability of, it's a wash. So one would replace the other. What we as a community are looking at is what we would do with the future DCs that we're collecting. And I know another number of other communities are also identifying with that, and can they be utilized for other EMS related, and we'll have to look at our study to determine that, because if you're not delivering policing services, municipalities that are with the OPP do not collect development charges for policing. They just don't collect it. So there's a benefit to your DCs on that your DCs would be lowered or you would increase them for other services. What's also important when I move on to the debt policy is what is it used for? So it is used specifically for new building, new additions, roads. It's not used to fund certain things like severance. That's not what we were intending to use it for. Or the purchase of a property, for example, because I mean, there have been initiatives where the staff have said that there's a validation between good and bad debt. And it's not that it's bad, it's basically is the debt strategically investing in something that has longevity and the return is strong enough, so it's not like a 5-year project that issuing debt doesn't make a lot of sense. So if it's got a 20-year life or 15-year life or longer, then there's really good reason to issue debt and makes sense. That doesn't exclude the fact that you still have to have a conversation about affordability. So in our debt policy, we did include, and it's an important option, is that where you don't need to issue debt in order to fund or manage a project, you do so because that's more strategic. And you fund it internally. But by funding it internally, it's not free because you would be earning interest on that money regardless. Whether it's in a GIC or a T-bill because we're low risk, you would pay yourself back. So in order for us to look at the 2.3 million in severance, which is a significant cost, we reviewed our debt policy. We also reviewed every single reserve that we had that we could borrow from based on 3 years and then pay ourselves back. And then you would then accrue the savings post that. So we would be borrowing from ourselves about 1.1 million of the 2.3 million because a number of those reserves are police related and they're specifically set aside for that and they're being used for that. So we'd be funding back the list of reserves that I've listed. So Jennifer, can you throw up page 18 so that people in the gallery can see that? So the asterisks beside the reserves are those that we would pay back, and the ones that we wouldn't pay back are listed. So for example, we wouldn't pay back the police equipment reserve, and if anything will be, if the scenario played out, you would be surplusing all of the equipment as part of that contractual relationship. You would no longer have a fleet. It would take us a few years to pay our reserves back. And that includes then covering off all of those costs by 2023, 2024. And then at year 4, based on this scenario, if this was undertaken by the town, you would then start to accrue operating savings. So what we did, and this is when I mentioned that while the consultants used 7 scenarios, we created an 8th scenario. We used the property costs that they had projected based on calls for service. We then looked at the Shelburne Police current costs and we escalated those costs based on what the chief had submitted to the consultant in terms of the budget. So we wanted to ensure that it was an operating to operating only scenario, so not even $150,000 in renovation. Because we thought it was important that the council understood where those savings on the operating costs would be. Because in the first 3 years, with the current scenario, the analysis is that the OPP will cost more, and that's understood. In the first year, it's significantly more because we're embedding $2.3 million in severance coverage, assuming it's a one-time lump sum payment. I've also referenced that there's an assumption that it is a one-time, and if salary continuance was a model instead, it mitigates the amount you have to refund. It doesn't change the amount of the cost, but it mitigates the change. So what we did is, and again, this is impossible to read, I apologize. We've given council big sheets, but we needed to, there was so much information on this spreadsheet. So Jennifer, could you flip it up to page 20? So in the scenario that we looked at was operating to operating only. And we created the scenario as if it was 2020 on what the household costs would be. And we used the consultant's numbers. And later in the report, we believe that those are really accurate because we have reviewed the operating costs for a number of municipalities in Ontario based on the 2019, all of which have similar character or larger character in terms of urban and downtown and traffic than Shelburne. So in each of those scenarios, there is significant cost savings to the town of Shelburne, We thought what was more important to look at, because this was a number of questions, and this is where I think I just emphasized that we have heard that the word base policing has been transposed as basic, meaning without enhancements or without this or that. So not to defend what the consultant has said, but to simply reiterate our understanding of how the OPP delivers, is that base policing includes all of the proactive types of services that were identified as of value to the community, whether or not that's council's decision. But an enhancement is not something that's not provided. So it's not that you wouldn't get X, Y, or Z. So what we did to address the enhancement question is we took literally, and it's included in one of your appendices, the 2019 bill based on the costing model for the Township of Mona, where they have an enhancement. Now granted, it's an enhancement for 0.75 of an officer. So that enhancement, which is dedicated to traffic enforcement, because they do have a significant speeding problem in their community, predominantly on Airport Road and Highway 10, is about $96,000 in 2019 dollars. We then escalated that to 2023 at a 2% rate. And on average right now, the OPP is a 1.5. So we've escalated it above what we think the escalation should be to show you what the cost would be for that complement. So in the first 3 years, we didn't, because you were getting the exact same staffing theoretically that you would with the Shelburne Police Services, because they're porting the existing complement. And we've confirmed that even if somebody retired or chose not to go OPP, the town of Shelburne would still have that complement, and they would structure it differently. So if that person wasn't there, it would be somebody else. So it's not like if I was the person who didn't go, they would reduce the complement in their contract. The contract complement we get is for 3 years. So with the enhancement, the 10-year cumulative savings to the town of Shelburne is itemized on the chart, is still about $5.9 million operating. This excludes capital and any of those associated costs. So it's not like what the consultant did, where he actually used a scenario with capital avoidance in there, and that was about $12.2 million. So what we thought we would do is strip that out and simply use operating to operating, because we felt that that is more realistic with respect to how you fund things. Because after a certain time period, it's savings operationally, which then that would be at council's discretion how you realign that or used it in your whatever you chose to. So those are the two scenarios we looked at. We also thought it was important because some of the concerns of the community, I guess, in whether or not there's other communities that are with the OPP that maybe not, like similar to Shelburne. We thought that we would use a list of local communities and literally provided you with the appendix of all of the range from 215 to 219 on those costs. And Jennifer, if you can pull up page 21. What we did is we looked at character communities that have what we believe are busy downtowns, strong traffic, whether it's local or destination-based, because they're visitor communities. Many of these are waterfronts, so they're very busy. They have some rural component to them in many cases, but maybe rural communities around them, which affect the utilization in their own communities. And they're communities that we would recognize, and they're on highway, many of them are on Highway 26, which is very similar to Highway 89 and Highway 10 in terms of busyness, if not busier. So in all of these scenarios, and again, without drilling down, we weren't really sure why Aurelia is the highest at 566 in 2019. We are guessing that maybe there's some social fabric, or the fact that there's a casino there, that there may be other elements that play in that cost. But what was important for staff to know is that places like Collingwood and Clearview, which has Stainer and has Creemore, and Southgate, which is just to the north of us, and while it's a smaller community, they still do have some downtown and, again, provincial highways going through their communities, are all listed for you. And the full attachments are there. So we did attach we didn't attach the policies and implications, and similar to the last report. What has a bearing on the decision that council has before you is your debt management policy. And again, the treasurer said in less than 2 weeks, and we apologize, it's probably going to need to be adjusted, just because of the debt load associated with the water and wastewater projects. And we were probably too conservative. We're probably too hopeful that the grants associated with some of those projects, and we thought we needed to pare that back to be realistic with some of the directions we've experienced from the province. We saw what happened with Well 3, and there is just not the capacity anymore for large infrastructure grants from the province and the federal government combined, so we thought we would err on the side of caution. And as the treasurer said, low end 12 million, high end 15, hoping it's the lower end, but that's really where we think we are right now. Our reserve fund policy was referenced. It's critically important as a source of internal financing to pay it back with interest, and the ARL limit. And while the province is exceptionally, I guess, I was going to say generous, but I don't know what word to use, generous in what they're allowing a community to borrow, the reality is no one could afford that. I mean, if you were committing that kind of repayment plan of almost $2.5 million a year, just because we could borrow it, we would bankrupt ourselves. We just don't have the capacity to pay with that. So that's why it was like way off to the left. We would never even consider that being realistic. 55 is pushing the envelope, not only on the tax implications, but on the ARL, because we have no capacity left in an emergency, and our boards, which rely on our ARL, would also not have any capacity. So there's 9 appendixes attached to this. I'm sorry, it's an enormously large report, but most of it is a regurgitation of past information and collated here so that nobody's having to cross-reference. So that's the summation of our report. We're happy to address any questions, realizing that you're going to look at rescheduling or holding this review at a later date. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we'll get the motion on the floor, and then we'll open it up to questions or comments. The motion reads, be it resolved the council receives report CAO 2019-08 for information regarding police services, operations and review, Ontario Provincial Police and Shelburne Police Services. The mover and seconder for that. Moved by Councillor Fegan, seconded by Councillor Wagner. All right. Questions, comments? All the good news. I'll start then. Question for the treasurer. If we could just flip back to the handout chart.
So we will, because this handout was something we put together as a supplement to tonight, we will also ensure that this is added so that the community has access to this bar chart.
So I think I understand what this represents, but I just want to make sure that I'm crystal clear. So starting with the chart or the graph, whatever you want to call it, on the far right-hand side, that basically demonstrates what's available to us under our current debt policy of 40%, right?
Yes.
Okay, so under that scenario, we have approximately $8.5 million in additional debt capacity that we could borrow.
And that is, as you say, a snapshot in time, that amount, because it depends on the current market rates, the term of the borrowing. I have stretched it out to 20 years in order to maximize it.
Okay.
If you were to, let's say, for example, with the Well 3 arsenic, if we end up needing to borrow $1 million and you decided, let's try and pay it off over 5 years or 10 years instead, that will increase your debt repayment amount, which will in turn lower your ARL. So if you shorten the length of a term of one of the loans, then you will not get to 8.5 million. So that's maximizing it out.
So based on the assumptions then and stretching it as far as we can, under our current debt policy, we would have the ability to borrow another $8.5 million. And then, as I understand it, referencing that back to the list of capital projects that we know we're going to be facing, so connecting link, Well 3 arsenic issues, sewage plant, EA work, new water storage, we need approximately $12 million in borrowed money to fund those projects.
Yes.
Okay.
And that is taking into consideration that we would be eligible for some type of grant revenue as well.
So looking at that, that's what would then sort of move us to that second graph. Okay, but that would require us to increase or amend our debt policy to increase it to 50%.
Yes, it would.
Okay. But then that still does not give us the room that we need for the $3 million renovation we're looking at. So then, okay, I think I've got this sequential order now. So then that moves us over to the next one, takes us from 12 and change to $15 million in potential money that could be borrowed. But that requires us to then bump our debt policy up to 55%.
That's right.
Okay.
And one of the items in our reserve policy is that it is ideal for your debt to reserve ratio to be 1-to-1. So in order for us to remain attractive to investors or people wanting to lend us money, your reserve should also increase. And we wouldn't be able to do that. To have debt of 15 million, we would not be able to have reserves of 15 million.
Unless we
To coincide with it.
raise taxes significantly to beef up reserves.
14%.
Deputy Mayor?
Yeah, thank you. So a lot of people will surmise that many of the expenditures that we have, we could pay for them through, at least maybe in portion, through the development charges. I believe it was maybe in our last meeting, there was discussion about the proposed changes by the province. I think Bill 108, which talks about where maybe the municipality would be able to collect the development charges, or that's the way it is now, up front. It could be delayed over a 6-year period, which would increase our borrowing cost. I don't know if you could speak to that in relation to our sort of financial forecast right now.
Right. So those regulations have not rolled out yet, so we're not sure exactly how they're going to look. But for commercial and industrial development charges, there is the opportunity for the developer to pay their DCs over a 6-year period rather than all up front. And some of the numbers that we've already provided to you tonight, for example, with the police expansion and the $3.9 million project, 9 million of that was to be funded from, 900,000 was to be funded from DCs that we have not collected yet. But that amount is not sitting in our DC bank account for police. That is only if we collect all of that at build out and prior to the new regulations taking effect.
So I'll just add that one of the things that we've identified many municipalities in this review is that specifically if there is no requirement to pay upfront for your DCs as the developer, and now the municipality has that burden, and you as a developer are no longer in existence in 4 years. Not only have we front-ended the costs associated with the collection of future DCs, we will never see a dime of it. So there's a real concern that the transfer of that burden to the municipality is going to be a hardship for us. Not only do we have to fund it, we have no guarantee that we will even get it refunded and collected in the future. So that's under discussion. We've submitted comments to that with that tone, and I think it's something that the local planners and all planners across the province are talking about.
Additional questions, comments?
Yeah, is there any way to change that? It's insane.
Is there an easy answer we're missing?
And if I could may just verify it myself, setting the debt policy at 40% was not an understatement on staff's part. It was intentional, so that you consciously are aware that you need to change it to move on. To set it at 55% right off the get-go wouldn't have proven, from my point of view as a treasurer,
I need to increase my limit.
Best interest.
Instead of you wanting it.
That's a good step.
Anything else?
I just want to add one more thing, it's difficult because there are other capital projects that are critical as well that have been identified in some schedules that we haven't even contemplated in debt capacity or the implications. Now, while some of them will have DC, so for example, the fire department has included in the future projection of about $2.2 million. That's nowhere in any of our projections currently. It's not in the DC schedule, it's not in the debt load. So as we stress that while we've given you a snapshot of the current water and wastewater predominantly, and that we would not do a debenture for the connecting link if we don't get the grant, there certainly are things beyond 2023 that we know will come up. That if we commit, and like we said, in the schedule we have, the lowest term that we have on the current loads is 7 years. The highest is 17 years. It's not like similar to a few projects that fell off this year that in 2 years we're going to have, $4 million that is going to be removed and that basically gives you capacity. So it's a difficult situation. I know that we stressed this during the 2019 budget review. We know that there are people that have challenged that staff wasn't really accurate in the kind of financial challenge that we were overviewing, but it truly is real. And within water and wastewater, again, while they are on water and wastewater rates, which means they have to escalate to cover, it doesn't affect your ability to borrow based on the ARL. And similar to the credit card analogy, just because you can borrow $20,000 and your current limit is $3,000, doesn't mean if you borrow it, you can pay it back. So on that happy note, I think we're
Okay. All right, well, I mean, this is part of the reason why I think council still needs some time to consider things. I mean, for my part, I certainly haven't made a final decision on this matter at all, but I will say this. I think the information that we've looked at here tonight and just gone over in some more detail crystallizes, in my mind at least, that we really are sort of down to two options here. On one hand, I think we have the OPP, and on the other hand, we can stretch ourselves and then find a way to afford a $3 million expansion. But beyond that, quite frankly, I think this information should put to rest any discussion, I think, of any new build, whether it's on free land or not, given the cost that would be needed for a standalone building of at least 8,700 square feet, plus servicing, plus grading. And it's just not rooted in financial reality, I don't think. So they say a problem once defined is half solved. So I guess I've at least defined the problem for myself. We're down to two options, and got a couple of weeks to work it out. All right, so I'll read the motion again. Moved by Councillor Fegan, seconded by Councillor Wagner. Be it resolved, the Council receives report CAO 2019-08 for information regarding police services, options and review, Ontario Provincial Police and Shelburne Police Services. All in favor? Motion's carried. Walter just passed me a reminder here that we need a motion to sit past 10 o'clock. Moved by Councillor Bernardo, seconded by Councillor Buffett. Be it resolved, the Council sit past 10 o'clock p.m. All in favor? Motion's carried. All right, so that brings us to notices of motion. And this stack, Walter, are those notices that you want?
No, those are regarding
communications. All right, so I do have one notice of motion, so I'll read the motion out, and then this will be considered at our July 8th meeting. Moved by Councillor Fegan, seconded by Councillor Hall. Be it resolved, the Council authorizes the costing to pave the northernmost lane of Fiddle Park from the entrance to no less than 600 square feet in or to the second laneway adjacent to said laneway to aid in extra uses of the park, with a report back to Council to be carried out by staff by by August. What's added on there? Oh, on said costing. Okay, all right. So we will consider that at the July meeting. Okay, so that takes us to communications. So there's a number of items here listed under communications. And Walter, you wanted to pull some of these matters out?
Yes, there's some motions there regarding some of the support for some of the communications motions.
Okay, could you just highlight which ones they relate to?
You're gonna make me go there.
That one's not signed.
I gotta go way back now. At the front of the agenda.
Do you want a hard copy?
I'm getting there. Okay, the resolutions from the town of Orangeville regarding opting out of the commercial industrial vacancy rebate program. Loss of revenue there.
Number
because if
4.
we don't-
Okay, yeah, we'll go back to them. I just wanted.
Okay, number 4. Number 6. And there was one more thought. Number 4, number 6. How many motions did we do there, sir?
I have 3 here. And then
Oh,
one that wasn't signed.
There was one regarding the stop sign on First Ave because of the discussion earlier tonight. That's not with communications.
Oh, okay.
That's separate. And what was the other one?
Is that a notice?
Because it was on the agenda and we talked about it tonight, do we need to make a notice motion?
Yeah.
Okay. And then the other one was number 3 regarding the Ontario. That's why.
Okay,
There
so
were 3.
3, 4, and 6. Okay,
4 and 6.
So we'll flip back to notices of motion. So one additional notice of motion to add, moved by Councillor Bernardo, seconded by Councillor Buffett. Be it resolved that council directs staff to investigate the cost of providing a 4-way stop signal at Gordon and First Avenue and initiate the 4-way stops to eliminate the issue of sight lines. So we'll consider that one as well at the next meeting. Okay, so then back to communications. So we'll do the blanket resolution first, then we'll deal with your 3 matters. So be it resolved that council receives items 1, 2, 5, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 under 8.0 communications as presented and circulated. The mover and seconder for that. Moved by Councillor Hall, seconded by Councillor Bernardo. All in favor? Carried. Okay, so item number 3. Town of Orangeville's motion, letter regarding the Ontario Municipal Partnership Fund.
And yeah, we support their resolution on that one there. They're looking for more information and more stabilization on the municipal fund, Ontario Municipal Fund. So that's all that is support of their resolution.
So we have a motion moved by Councillor Bernardo, seconded by Councillor Buffett. Be it resolved that the town of Shelburne supports the town of Orangeville's motion regarding Ontario Municipal Partnership Fund. Any comments or discussions on that? All in favor? Motion's carried. Number 4, regarding the opt-out of commercial industrial vacancy rebate program. Okay, so we have another motion moved by Councillor Bernardo, seconded by Councillor Buffett. Be it resolved that the town of Shelburne supports the town of Orangeville's motion regarding the resolution to opt out of the commercial industrial vacancy rebate program. Do you want to discuss that at all?
I believe we lose tax revenue by being in the vacancy. It doesn't also promote the usage of the buildings, which is something we do want to promote if they are vacant, rather than allowing the owners of the buildings to continue to leave them vacant because they don't have to pay taxes on it.
Do you want to speak to that, Carey?
We currently have one property that has filed annually for the vacancy rebate. It ends up costing the town, sent out an email.
I know, I remember that. I just can't remember the number.
I
But I
want
knew
to
we had
say,
one.
$700, but I don't even think it's that. I think it's 700 total, and the town portion I believe is 250. We have nothing like Orangeville does in comparison to dollar figures.
So is the intent of the motion to adopt
No, just
the same approach, or just
adopt the same approach, I guess, is the intent. Yeah.
The vacancy rebate is set by the county, so it has to be the county that opts out of it as the higher tier. Us supporting Orangeville would just give the county more incentive to do that.
So if we pass the motion, you know, we can provide a copy of this motion then to Orangeville and Dufferin County. Okay, all right.
And it's only changing the vacancy portion of it. It's not changing the tax rate for the vacant and excess lands.
Okay.
It's not touching that.
Okay. All right. Any further questions or comments on that one? All in favor? It's carried as well. Okay, and then finally, motion again moved by Councillor Bonato, seconded by Councillor Buffett. Be it resolved that the town of Shelburne supports the resolutions from the townships of Melanchthon and municipality of South Huron requesting Ontario Good Roads Association approach the Rural Ontario Municipal Association to establish a working relationship to organize an annual combined conference. Do you want to give some background on that?
And they used to be a combined conference years ago. This year they split and went apart. It was a good working relationship in a combined conference where you had both municipal councillors as well as staff going down there and getting information. I think the fact that they've split apart doesn't make sense.
Yeah. My understanding of sort of the more recent development is that Good Roads has sent a letter to Roma asking for them to reconsider that working relationship, and Roma's initial response at least has been that they want to continue doing their own separate conference. So that's fine. I mean, we can support these two resolutions from our neighboring municipalities and encourage the two groups to get together on it. Okay. All in favor? That's carried. All right, we're almost there. So confirming bylaw, be it resolved that leave be given for the reading and enacting of bylaw number 41-2019, being a bylaw to confirm certain proceedings of the Council of the Corporation of the Town of Shelburne for its regular council meeting held June 24th, 2019. The mover and seconder, moved by Councillor Hall, seconded by Councillor Fegan. All in favor? Carried. And finally, be it resolved that we now adjourn to meet at the call of the mayor. Mover and seconder. Councillor Wagner, seconded by Councillor Bonato. All in favor? Carried. Thank you all.